Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of the Makdisi Street podcast. I'm Karim and I'm here, of course, with my brothers Sari and Osama in California. And today we're going to be talking about this issue in Lebanon, where I am at the American University in Beirut. And we have with us a prominent Lebanese journalist and public figure, Jad Ghosn. We're really happy to have with him. And he currently works at Al Arabi TV, and he also hosts the podcast Hamish Jad, which focuses on in-depth political, economic, and regional analysis. Jad is also a very well-known investigative reporter on issues relating to public policy issues in Lebanon, but as well as regional and international affairs. And so we're really happy to have Jad with us to discuss what is a very complicated, complex issue, both in terms of what's going on inside Lebanon, but also the impact of this on the region and the region on Lebanon. So Jad, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Great. I thought it would be a good place to start, especially with your, with your personal story, given that your background and I think your family background kind of comes from a particular affiliation with the Free Patriotic Movement of former President Michel Aoun in a particular area, and then you switch, especially after 2019 and the collapse of the Lebanese state and the financial and economic sectors, and you kind of go more into independent and left-leaning politics. So can you tell us a little bit about this and what this tells us about Lebanon today?
Yeah, I believe it's the long story short. It's a typical story for my age group, I guess. Not for all Lebanese, definitely. But yes, I inherited my political leanings from my family, which was deeply affected by the civil war, and both of my parents were supporters of the Free Patriotic Movement, basically from a confessional background. Being Christians in Lebanon, they had to choose between the Lebanese forces or the Free Patriotic Movement. Being a little bit less appealed by the militias of the war and by Samir Jaja as the leader of the Lebanese forces. So my parents saw with the General Aoun being the head of the army in Lebanon at the end of the war that he was the face of the state. So that was their leaning. I inherited it. I just wanted to be interested in politics, I guess, just to grow old in my parents' eyes at the beginning. Later on, I was in university. I had the political science degree, but later on I just continued my master's degree in political science and public administration. So I was back then in the Free Patriotic Movement, but I was fading out, kind of, and I left the party in 2012. Since 2010, I was gradually getting out and out because you can't see any form of real politics in Lebanese political parties. Politics, as a definition, is distorted and it's captured by confessional elites who serve defined and narrow interests, and their legitimacy comes from saying that they represent the confessional factions we have in Lebanon. So when I had my studies in university, what I was studying was not being reflected in the real world because there was no public policy debate in Lebanon. So that was the initial getting out of that political leaning. And I was just trying to search and find my way. And in big strokes, yes, one can say that I'm left-leaning, but I believe that politics in Lebanon cannot really be defined now between a right wing or a left wing divide.
So Jad, could I ask you just, it's great to have you on. Could I ask you just to explain a little bit for those of us who are, for audience who may not know what the Free Patriotic movement or party was, or the Lebanese forces, just very broadly, what is the difference between those two parties and why are they significant? Just in general.
Within the Christian kind of political makeup.
Yeah. And also to remember, confessional also means sectarian.
Sectarian, definitely.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the political setup in Lebanon in the pre-war era was basically divided between the Christians and the Muslims. And then the war broke out, the civil war broke out in 1975. On the Christian side, the most prominent political party was Kataib, phalanges. So out of that political party came the military wing at the beginning, which was the Lebanese forces, which is a Christian militia. I can't say that it was totally separatist, but at least it was calling for some sort of autonomy for the Christians and was fighting the war for that kind of goal. At the end of the war, the Lebanese state was really fragile. The Lebanese army also was fragmented, but the part of the Lebanese army that was in the Christian areas was headed by General Michel Aoun, who was the head of the army, who had a couple of wars at the end of the war between 1988 and 1990 in the name of the state, but implicit in that call was that he was the Christian part of the state. So that was the introduction of this rivalry, battles, wars that was started from 1986 and then got into bigger areas of conflict in 1988 and is still ongoing till now. So the Free Patriotic Movement was the party that was headed by General Michel Aoun after he was exiled from Lebanon in 1990 because he fought the Syrians and he lost. And it's this component of the Christian divide was opposed by the Lebanese forces, still headed by Samir Jaja, who was the head of that party since 1986.
And this is important, Jad, just as we get to what's going on today, I think this is an important background because both in terms of the Christian politics, for the most part, the electorate leans either towards one or the other of these two. And they're both now, at least over the past 10, 15 years, they've become the establishment within this Christian community and within Christian politics. And so when we come to talk about how this collapses, I think these are both of them end up bearing or part of the system. And so this is what I wanted to ask in terms of as you shift in after 20, how did you read the collapse in 2019? And why is it that groups like the Lebanese forces kind of continued, at least initially, to gain popularity within the Christian community? How do you read that kind of shift and your shift as part of this to more independent politics?
Yeah, my problem personally was that I was not finding answers within these kind of the political divides, because if you are not so involved in sectarian politics or you're not appealed by such rhetoric, and you're trying to search for solutions for this never-ending problems in the Lebanese political system, I was trying to see what is the problem, and the door that I entered towards finding an answer was, let's try to see it in the political economy sides of the issue, the political conflict in Lebanon, which no Lebanese political party, Muslim, Christian, or whatever, has a clearly defined answer in public policy terms. So I believe that what happened in 2019 can be defined, and why the Lebanese forces, the Free Patriotic Movement, and all of the other parties, Hezbollah and all of the others, don't have a clear answer to give, is because the Lebanese divide being engendered from the Lebanese Civil War as a vertical social groups, sectarian groups. You have the Maronites, you have the Sunnis, you have the Druze. The political leader of each political party represents all of the social interests within this vertical group. So he has the rich and he has the poor, he has the employed, the non-employed, he has the bankers, he has the depositors. So if you want to give any answer to have a preference of a specific social group over the other, which is policy making, you have to do that, especially in economic issues, you will have to divide your own coalition, let's say. And you will not in return have, let's say in the case of Michel Aoun or Samir Jaja, if I select the depositors or the poor or the unemployed as my political base, I will lose the bankers, the rich, the well-offs, and I will not win the support of the poor of the other sect because they are Sunni, they are Shiites, and they would not accept a Christian leader. That was the understanding. So that's why they try to escape from giving any clearly defined answers in terms of public policy and go to the cliches of let's get rid of corruption and easy answers that can maneuver its way.
So Jad, just explain in broad terms what happened in 2019. I mean, so this is a pivotal moment in modern Lebanese history.
Yeah.
There was a collapse, an economic and financial collapse. What actually happened? Because that's clearly something that is pivotal to your criticism
Yeah.
of a sector of these elites, who basically, despite their sectarian differences, actually share a basic goal in not actually in not presenting any kind of cohesive or coherent financial plan for Lebanon.
Yeah, and I believe the collapse in 2019 can explain a lot of the Lebanese political system as a whole. Not to have a long answer as I just did, I believe that the problem of the Lebanese political system is that it legitimized the end, the civil war setup. All of the militias leaders now are political party leaders that are now just transitioned into being ministers and MPs in the Lebanese parliament. What happened is that in the 90s, you had lots of reconstruction to do, and Rafiq Hariri was back then the prime minister, and we embarked on a large-scale reconstruction, mainly focused in Beirut. We had lots of public debt. In 1997, this cannot be sustained anymore. Instead of asking questions or re-questioning what we did and trying to find an alternative way, they doubled down. And now, since 1997, we began financing our public debt with a new debt, but dominated in US dollars. So in money that we cannot create through our central bank. This problem accumulated over 2 decades. In 2019, we had about $96 billion in debt. 40 billion of it was in US dollars. Our whole economy was about $55 billion. The deposits in the banks that were used to finance the state, so the debt, the banks were financing the state through the dollars of the depositors, which are mainly through the expats who just put money through their bank accounts in the US, in the Gulf areas, and back to Lebanon in the banks. The banks use it to finance the state. The state gets more and more in debt and finance the pegging. So that all exploded in 2019. So you had a threefold crisis. The banks were all insolvent, the central bank also, and the public treasury, the finance treasury of the state. So it was one of the three biggest financial crises of these two couple of centuries, the 21st and 20th century, according to the World Bank.
Okay, Jad. So there's a lot of complexity, and I think we'll probably get into some of this in a little bit more detail. You ran in the last election, so since with the kind of collapse in 2019, financially, politically, economically, and there was a lot of poverty that came about. There was a huge amount of popular discontent. There was a lot of discussion that the parliament and this political class no longer enjoyed the legitimacy that even within sectarian terms it might have prior to that, but then after 2019 there was a lot of discontent even within each sect or within each group vis-a-vis their own leaders. And so there was the first parliamentary elections that happened after 2019 in 2022, and you actually ran in there where you ran it, and ultimately it was unsuccessful.
Yep.
And so my question to you is, as you ran there, and I think I think one of your claims was that in parliamentarians are, for the most part, there were puppets. There was a kind of lack of legitimacy. Did your experience in running and ultimately losing in the election make you cynical in terms of trying to say, look, this is how you can fix Lebanon? Is it possible to reform? Is it possible to bring up progressive issues like healthcare, like hospitals, like things that had collapsed, especially post 2019? Can the Lebanese political system domestically change? Is my question to you.
Well, one does not lack any dose of cynicism in order just to be resilient enough to carry on in Lebanon. You have to. just state the fact that the whole problem that we have is big enough to be claimed that hard to change internally. But I'm not cynical to the degree to say that it is an impossibility. But the problem is that the definition of what politics is distorted to a level that some of the problem can now be termed as a culture problem, where you not necessarily would have any problem with the factions of the society when you try to diagnose what the problem is. But when you start trying to deliver any real solutions in terms of public policy, then it would maybe sound like any foreign language that people don't understand, because people really don't think that anything can be done internally. And people see politics in terms of good people and bad people. So I vote for the good people. I don't really take a close look into the programs because of their recent experiences. Because of now you said in the opening of this episode that some forms of U.S. politics might seem similar to what we have in Lebanon. Yes, I believe that Lebanon is an extreme example of where can things go if tribal politics really dominate institutions. And we have that for maybe 50 years now. So people are cynical. I am to a certain extent, but one cannot say that it is an impossibility, but it is a hard task. And we are seeing now what's happening around us in the region. And you see that the Lebanese government, it's not only political parties, the whole of the Lebanese government says directly or indirectly, we are just stalling with our decisions just to wait what would happen to Iran. Because if Iran's regime changes, we have a different political setup. If it does not, it doesn't matter what we decide here. So all of the country surrendered its agency.
Jad, I mean, all my life, I mean, we grew up in Lebanon. I mean, we're slightly older than you, but we grew up in Lebanon during the Civil War. And of course, all our lives, the phrase that you know, the current situation, you know, is a difficult situation, and we have to, you know, we have to survive the current situation. I mean, that's and everything is postponed to a future,
Yep.
and there's never any agency. But I guess to go back quickly to 2019, to this financial crisis, maybe you can explain a little bit about, you know, because it's confusing for people maybe in other countries, the idea of the banks held dollar-denominated accounts, correct? These were accounts that people deposited dollars, not Lebanese pounds, which is the currency.
No, US dollars.
They're US dollars, and then the banks were loaning those dollars to the government, to the central
and
bank,
the central bank, both.
and to the central bank
at very high rates of interest, Osama.
at exorbitant interest, correct? And then eventually it got to a point where this could no longer be sustained. Why could it no longer be sustained? And then what happened to all those, the what you're calling the depositors, the people who had, we're talking about millions of dollars, correct? Of people who had all their money in these banks. What happened to those accounts? And what did the government do? Because, you know, Iceland had a financial crisis. Greece had a financial crisis. Many countries have had financial crises. But in Lebanon, it just seems to me there was zero solution. It's nothing. I mean, as far as I can tell, Karim, obviously, I mean, he lives there and he's experienced this firsthand. I mean,
there was a solution.
Like,
I mean, Jad may agree or not, but there was a solution, which is that all these guys got away scot-free. That's
okay.
How
So
I
yeah,
see it.
maybe you can explain, because it's extraordinary that a country going through a financial collapse and people like Karim and many others, obviously not just Karim, were just left tough luck, basically.
Yeah, so the issue in Lebanon, what many people around the world might not understand, is that in Lebanon you can deal in the supermarket or wherever you go in dollars, not only in Lebanese pound, which is a unique case because during the post-Civil War era, the economic system that the government chose is that we should really try to make benefit of the Gulf's economies, which basically run through dollars because they sell oil, which is denominated in dollars. So if we don't dollarize our economy, these dollars wouldn't have their way to come into the Lebanese financial system. We had that, and plus you can add the expats, which is a large portion of our society. So once you have this system, the banks, in order to have dollars in Lebanon, because we cannot print dollars, we can print Lebanese pounds, but we cannot print dollars. So in order to have the dollars, you have to raise the interest on the dollars in order to seduce the expats or whomever else to bring their dollars to Lebanon. And that happened. That was successful. The problem is that deposits are really debt because you have to repay them back plus the interest. How can you pay back such large amounts of dollars? And the number of, if you want the number of the total deposits in dollars in Lebanon in 2019, before the collapse, it was $120 billion in dollars. So the whole economy was about $55 to $60 billion. Deposits in dollars in Lebanon, owned by Lebanese or whomever else, were more than double that amount. So there came a moment where you cannot finance these deposits. The banks couldn't pay back the dollars because they hadn't had. So in order to finance these high interest rates, the central banks, the Central Bank of Lebanon, raised the interest even higher. So the banks would give you your interest as a depositor, take the money and put them in the central bank and earn a profit. In 2019, we just woke up in the morning and we knew, it was a surprise to many Lebanese, that the central bank, who had in its balance sheet around $90 billion in its assets, it was a trick. It should have been in the liabilities, and it was a whole big issue called the Lebanese big Ponzi scheme. So that's the way these dollars financed the government, but it was a trick, it was a ploy to just keep these dollars coming into the country. What happened afterwards, lacking the solution, it was a tacit solution, an unannounced solution, not to do anything, just to reinvigorate that old system in a new way. It's a smaller pie now, but we can do it once again. I have the Center of Statistics in Lebanon. I don't know how to translate it into English. It's an official bureau for statistics in Lebanon, and it tracks the number of immigrants. The official number, the net number of immigrants from 2019 until September of 2025, total, it's the net. It's 805,000 person. So the immigration blew up.
You mean emigration? We're talking
emigration.
About
people leaving Lebanon.
Leaving
not immigration.
Okay.
Emigration.
Yeah, emigration.
Yeah. Okay.
So you have 800,000 new people that left Lebanon. Basically,
and for people who don't know, sorry, Jad, but the population of Lebanon is something like 4
billion,
5, maybe 4 million people. So when 800,000 people leave, that's a very significant proportion of the population.
Plus a couple billion refugees, don't forget, and others.
Yeah, and you have a couple of billion refugees from Syria, but also these 800,000 that left Lebanon during these past 6 years are mainly concentrated in the age bracket of 18 to 35, which is the main productive sector of your society, has left, is working overseas, and is transferring some money to Lebanon. So now we are reconfiguring that old system into a smaller pie and a more collapsing institutions.
What happened, Jad? What happened to the depositors? So in other words, they lost their money, or just to explain they lost their money, but now, I mean, there are things called fresh dollars. I mean, the whole thing is actually it's absurd, honestly.
So you're going to get into extreme details.
No, because it's sort of, or because this may be the way other countries go in the future.
I don't believe any country in the world can do what the Lebanese state did.
No doubt. But there's a lack of accountability. Do the banks collapse? Do the banks shut down?
No.
Are the banks still there?
No, the banks are still there. They are called by the government as zombie banks, but we don't call them insolvent and go the legal route to just do the legal insolvency steps. We don't do that because the big bankers are really strong politically and have political affiliations. and contribute to many political parties. So we don't do that. The depositors' money are fading away. They created a term that these are Lebanese dollars. The dollars that you had in the banks are now Lebanese dollars called lollars. And any dollars that got into the country after 2019, after the collapse, are called fresh dollars. These are traded freely. The others are through a capital control, illegal capital control mechanism dealt internally with discounts. That's
So why should anyone? Why should anyone? Sorry, my last question. Why should anyone put dollars in Lebanon again?
No one is putting dollars in Lebanon. Now we have a cash economy because we have zombie banks. So this cash economy attracts dirty money. So it's not a call for investment. It's a call for those who have some money to deal around in what we call the black money or the dirty money in Lebanon. It's the black market.
So Jad, just to come to what's going on today, recently, so you've described this incredibly complex, basically Ponzi scheme that happened in Lebanon. We've as I know and as you know and as we all know, a lot of our money, most people's savings, that if those that had money in the banks disappeared, and there was basically zero accountability. Very recently, there's been negotiations with the IMF. It's been dragging for a while, and the Lebanese government has passed some form of financial banking sector kind of reform. Can you just very, very quickly tell us what this is and whether this meets the requirement for reform of any kind or helps the depositors, or is this just a kind of get out of jail free card for the banks, none of which, I think it's worth mentioning, none of which, as I know, none of which have collapsed or left or been shut
or legally
or
prosecuted
merged or anything else, or prosecuted or anything else.
Yep. What the government is trying to do is to have a financial plan to appease the banks and at the same time get rid of this problem, because the US is really pressuring the government to get rid of the cash economy, because Hezbollah benefits from this cash economy, which the US cannot monitor. So what the government is doing is that we will combine all of the assets of the state, the central bank, and everything we have in our reserves, from the gold, which is denominated around $50 billion now, to all of the other assets of the state and the central bank. We will put it in one basket, and it will finance 80% of the deposits, but the first $1,000 for every depositor will be paid through the next 4 years, if this law is approved in the parliament. And all of the other amounts of money, the big depositors and stuff like that,
Wait,
it would be
$1,000, Jad, you said?
100,000.
Yeah, to all depositors over 4 years. And any amount that is above $100,000 would be through certificates backed by the assets of the central bank. The first will be paid after 10 years. The second batch would be paid after 15 years, and the third batch after 20 years. The share of the bank, what would the banks pay? It would be 27% of the whole amount. The other 73% would be paid by the central bank, thus the Lebanese government, because the central bank cannot be in the negative. If it is in the negative, the government will repay. The banks refused this because it's too, they said we cannot carry that heavy of a burden, paying 27%, and they are now negotiating the government on lowering their end of the bargain. So even the sweetheart deal is not enough. We will see where things will go.
And Jad, just one last point on this, because this is really important. The question of the cash economy you mentioned, that, because we're going to talk obviously about Hezbollah in a minute, but it's really important in this whole story to mention the cash economy, the way in which Hezbollah, in a sense, and those around them deal, considering Lebanese banks have been for a long time heavily monitored through the central bank and other mechanisms for money laundering and especially for Hezbollah. And so how does Hezbollah circulate its money, and what is this clampdown on the cash economy that Hezbollah, in a sense, relies on?
So Hezbollah, no one can say for certain how Hezbollah is managing all of his financial stuff, but one knows that Hezbollah deals not through the banking sector, because the banking sector is overseen by the central bank, and the central bank is overseen indirectly by the US authorities, and somewhere directly also. So Hezbollah gets cash. It used to be, we used to hear that it used to come from Syria in the days of Bashar Assad regime, and used a little bit the airport and the port, the maritime port that we have. Now things are more complex, definitely after the fall of the Assad regime, but there are many reports. I cannot say if these reports are true or not, but that Hezbollah is still using the airport, but more discreetly through smaller amounts by more numerous, more people gets little amounts, and is trying just to manage a period. But the cash economy as a whole is a place where you can have some cryptocurrencies and get some form of leeway, and you can have gold. You can get in gold in Lebanon, so you cannot really monitor the workings of Hezbollah. But the reports coming from the US and coming from Israel basically say that the cash economy, and everyone knows in Lebanon that definitely Hezbollah will benefit from the cash economy, because he usually used not the official banking routes when dealing with his financial issues.
Jad, I know we're going to go on to talk about other things more locally in Lebanon and regionally too, but I wanted just to bring in, as somebody who's obviously split his time between Lebanon and the US, we all grew up in Beirut, and we all came here to the US for university and graduate school and so on. Osama and I teach here now. You know, back in the 80s and 90s, one would often hear people on the right wing in American politics saying they want to get rid of the state. They want to just dismantle the state. The state is an imposition on them. They have this sort of,
they should come
there's
to
something
Lebanon.
like that, but this is like always through the 80s and 90s, I would say. But if you want to see what a country is like without a state, look at Lebanon. We know what a country without a state looks like. It's like it's you know, it's we all know, right? There's you know, who fixes what and what's happening, what's this. So that's interesting that it's always in this sort of fantasy of the U.S. right, not to be like Lebanon, but to have this kind of Wild West, everybody takes care of themselves kind of thing. But interestingly, as the U.S. has gone on in what I would consider its sort of imperial de-development, if you look at the U.S. now in comparison to Lebanon, it's really uncanny to look at a ruling elite in both situations, composed essentially of oligarchs that are responsible and accountable basically to each other, certainly not to the people at large. And yes, both formally have democratic processes, but I mean, in the U.S. too, the whole democratic process is very much, you know, it's very much under threat for all kinds of reasons. It's manipulated and distorted, and you know, the ways in which people can vote and who can vote, all that's very much up for grabs in the American political system. And we have essentially now a president in the U.S. who's basically, it's not that he's not qualified for office. I mean, he isn't qualified for office, but that the people around him are a coterie of fellow billionaires and oligarchs and so forth, and they're the ones, you know, making decisions about the future of the U.S. It's just ironic that one of the world's biggest powers, the U.S., can be compared to one of the world's smallest powers, Lebanon. And this, but I'm just saying, I don't know what to do with this other than the fact that it's uncanny how similar these two states have become, even though they ought to be diametrically opposite from each other. They're not that opposite in a way.
But I guess the interesting issue to really think about, why did people vote for such a person? He is not really trying to hide any of his eccentricities. So the issue, I believe, that we got into that point is the same issue that got Lebanon to that point, when people really become cynical and don't believe really in the legitimacy of the state, that this state really is working for me. One was trying to search for answers out of the box. So, Karim, you said that I ran into the election in 2022. We were the opposition and stuff like that. So we got some votes. The votes that we got mainly were votes voting against those political parties more than voting for our political program. That's one. But two, some of the criteria that they liked in me personally are not necessarily good criteria. So just because I never served in any office, that's the good thing. We cannot believe any person who had even 6 months in a ministry that he is not corrupt. So we are trying to search out of this whole box of politics as a whole. Mainly who can just put themselves in the forefront are those who have the financial means to just be on TV and affect politics and rebrand themselves that I'm a businessman, I'm against politicians, because politics is corrupt, not specific politicians or specific policies. So this is the typical Lebanese politics for 50 years. And the marriage between the political leadership and the financial power points, let's say, is old enough, and now it's really strong in Lebanon to sustain 6 years of a financial crisis without taking any measure and not being accountable even in the polls.
Yeah, it's truly, I mean, as someone living here, it's truly extraordinary. And to be honest, both myself and I think a lot of people that I know, at least, Jad, you know more because you're out talking to a lot of people. It's become normalized. The reality is that we have accepted it after the protests. In effect, I think it's been normalized, and they won in the sense of it's been normalized, and none of us really expect actual accountability. None of us really expect that we're going to get our money back. None of us really expect that the banks and the oligarchs and the financial people and all that stuff, that they're going to be investigated. I'm not even talking about convicted. Just bring them, talk. What happened, guys? What's going on? What are you planning to do? Nothing like that. Yeah. And most likely, the banker association, along with their governmental allies, will come up with something that makes sense to them, and we kind of move on from there. So I want to use this transition to say, okay, we have now, presumably in May of 2026, there's the upcoming parliamentary elections. I'm not sure if you're planning to run or not, but presumably it most likely going to be at least the talk on the street that it's most likely. So can you just tell us about what these elections represent, and not in the kind of small local dynamics, but in the regional dynamics, right? Because if they get postponed or not, it's because somebody from outside is telling them they need to be postponed. So who has this impact?
The Speaker of the Parliament got officially and said to a newspaper that the ambassadors of the US and the KSA asked us to postpone the elections, the parliamentary elections. So that's official. So internally, the elections usually is just used as a means to re-legitimize the political system every now and then. It's not as it should be every 4 years. Sometimes we postpone for 9 years. But usually, elections only happen when we can figure out its result beforehand. Now, I believe in this time period that we are now living in, the Lebanese elections is a problem for the US and for the whole regional setup that was put in place after the 7th of October, Israel's retaliation and all what happened during those last 3 years. Because the Lebanese government that we have now is a very pro-American government, at least majoritarily. Hezbollah is in the government, but in the minority. And this government accepted some of the terms of disarmament of Hezbollah on a time frame that was accepted from the Americans, more or less. So if now the elections happens in May, 10th of May, this government will be transformed into a resigned government. It will be an interim government, and a new government should be formed. And it's not guaranteed that neither this Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, or the makeup of the government can be put up once again. So before we change the whole setup of the region, we don't have any interest as the Americans or maybe the French or definitely the Israelis, but the Israelis really don't care because they are striking anything that they see as a threat And they are, even when the Lebanese government said that we are ready to negotiate, which was a breakthrough in Lebanese foreign politics. It was a break with 80 years of foreign Lebanese politics, which we usually didn't recognize Israel. And then we agreed to negotiate. I don't know how to translate it. Salam, adil wa shamil. So it's a regional peace that we should be
Just
part
comprehensive,
of.
a comprehensive and just peace.
Yeah. So now we are saying, let's put all of the comprehensivity and the justice of any peace accord. We are ready to have bilateral negotiations. The Israelis didn't even respond. So the Israelis are not really interested in peace with Lebanon because the statu quo is more beneficial than peace. They can strike everywhere now. They can do whatever they want. So I believe for this statu quo and waiting for what's going to happen in the region, no one is really interested in the elections in Lebanon. It will complicate matters without bringing any new solution to the table.
Jad, just a clarification here. From my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the reasons that the Americans and others want to postpone this is the possibility that Hezbollah might win the seats that it currently, Hezbollah and its allies might control all the parliamentary seats, at least among the Shia seats that are allocated. And so therefore, in the language of legitimacy, it would, despite the so-called defeat, it re-legitimizes itself, at least within Lebanese politics, and so therefore makes it stronger in the domestic front. And that's something all these forces want to avoid because they're trying to put all this pressure on Hezbollah, both domestically and sort of regionally, internationally. Is this not the case?
Yeah, in other terms, not only just it will re-legitimize Hezbollah in terms of its Shiite representation, but in order to reflect the shifts in balance of power in the region onto Lebanon, we need that the elections reflect a new political setup. Basically, in the Shiite faction, at least we should have some parliamentary seat. Now, Hezbollah and Amal movement, they are both allied. They have all of the 27 Shiite seats in the Lebanese parliament. If you cannot at least have a couple, then they have a monopoly on the representation of a sectarian group in Lebanon, which in our political system means that you have some sort of a veto power. So the political program to reflect the shift in balance that happened in the region onto Lebanon means that the election is only beneficial when we can just slice a portion of that representation and say that Hezbollah and Amal don't have a monopoly on the Shiites, and thus we can exclude them from the government and have others to represent the Shiites.
This makes sense, and it kind of transitions us into this key topic. So we're talking about upcoming elections, whether it happens or doesn't happen. And I think you mentioned earlier, Jad, and as far as I'm concerned, it seems quite clear that there's a bit of this banking stuff that's taking place in the background to kind of preserve the status quo and get the bankers and the politicians kind of to get off scot-free. And on the other hand, there's not much discussion in the public realm. I mean, maybe it's happening in certain committees on healthcare and fixing the infrastructure and fixing the really poor education system and healthcare system and all the pensions, poverty, all inequality, all these things that most Lebanese are invested in. And instead, the only topic is the question of Hezbollah's arms and this international regional agenda, which is, okay, Hezbollah lost, and now we need to make sure, complete it by disarming them completely, and that's really the only topic for both the parliamentary election agenda and the general public policy discussion. Do you agree with this? Sorry about the
I agree. That's just to portray our condition. Yes, I believe that Hezbollah and his opponents benefit from making the armaments of Hezbollah the center of all of the Lebanese politics. Because Hezbollah is one of these political parties in Lebanon that do not have any public policy based program based on how we want to move the country forward or a certain vision of what is the relationship between the state institutions and society. Hezbollah is just like the Lebanese forces, but in a different sect. So, and definitely carrying arms, which is also a big difference now. But all of these political parties benefit from having at the center stage of the elections an issue that they can easily manipulate. It is really hard for all of these parties to have an answer on healthcare, because when you ask, how would you, first of all of their constituency will be pushing for that to happen because people need some form of healthcare in Lebanon. They need electricity, they need better wages. If this is what the political parties in Lebanon have to answer to, they would have a big problem. Because, as I said beforehand, their whole legitimacy is a vertical relationship with society. They cannot just make, they cannot have options that can fragment their coalition, saying that we will tax you and they will have lower taxes on that certain faction of society. It will have, and now it's happening in the public sector because they are asking for some raises because of the purchasing power is getting down and down because of financial crisis. The government cannot answer by saying that, yes, you are allowed with a certain raise, but no, these institutions are not really efficient. We cannot do that. Either they have a raise for all of the public sector, which the state cannot carry on carrying, or we don't do anything, and we're not doing anything. So I believe Hezbollah and its opponents will make this the basic issue. Hezbollah's constituency really wants these armaments to be kept by Hezbollah, and it's not an issue for him, for Hezbollah, or for its leader, Naim Qasim, to put it in the forefront. And it will definitely be the card that Samir Ja'ja, as the opponent, as the main opponent of Hezbollah, would put forward, because there is a connotation of a sectarian divide, having a specific sect carrying the arms, but not us, not the other sect, not the Sunnis, not the Shiites. So it will benefit everybody at the end.
So Jad, just to follow up on this question about Hezbollah, I mean, after as a part of the Israeli sort of assault on Lebanon and the genocide in Gaza and as you said, the Israelis keep bombing every single day, as far as I can tell, in Lebanon. The Hezbollah, the question is Hezbollah still a force of resistance in any sense or shape? And the second question is, those who oppose Hezbollah in Lebanon often claim to be sovereignty. That was the discourse they kept using about Lebanon, that we are the forces of sovereignty, and yet they're always working with the United States, with a huge embassy, in Aukar, in the massive U.S. embassy in Lebanon. And as you said, the French and others, but it's basically the U.S. that seems to be running Lebanon. So how do they reconcile this business of sovereignty with a complete lack of sovereignty that they actually exhibit every day?
Yeah, the rationalization of this can be that, yes, we are a small country. We should recognize the balance of power. We cannot say no to the U.S., and we cannot really be an island economically, because if the U.S. wants to ban the fluctuation of the U.S. dollars to Lebanon, this whole country will be turned into rubble in weeks. So we have to be realistic, and we should deal. All of this is fine. One can debate these issues. The problem is that now, in the literal sense, Israel is occupying lands in Lebanon. So it's not about an imbalance in political relations with the U.S. It's a physical issue that we have, that the Lebanese government is saying that now the Lebanese government, for the first time, has full control of its southern borders, because now Hezbollah has withdrawn from a specific region in southern Lebanon. But at the same time, Israel have 5 big areas on the borders that is occupying, and you can add to it the daily airstrikes over many regions in Lebanon. So now, literally, we have a problem in terms of our sovereignty. Literally, it's not a matter of imbalance of power towards the US or other. We have a problem with Israel. And the big issue we have now is that really the answer, to really have a good answer, it's a difficult proposition. Because on the one hand, Hezbollah was a form of resistance, but I have a problem with Hezbollah, because being a form of resistance, why do we have a resistance? Because what you are implying in having a resistance is that the government of this country gave away some of its functions, which is one of them, is to defend the country. So I will retaliate on my own to defend this country as a resistance. So how can you be a resistance and part of the government that relinquished one of its duties, which is to defend? You cannot be sitting with all of these people that you will, on a daily basis, accuse of being the Israeli puppets or the US puppets, and do politics as usual without any internal program on how to run this country. Because I believe that having a resistance, having a country that is trying to defend itself, especially against a state with such power as Israel, military power, it's not only a matter of how many missiles do you have. It's also a matter of economic sovereignty. And we saw what the financial collapse had in repercussions on our internal ability to defend ourselves from intelligence, the Mossad or other intelligence group, buying off some officials in the Lebanese army and inside Hezbollah also, because the median wage in Lebanon after the financial collapse was around $300 per month. So many people were seeking to how to have a better life, even if it was a proposition by the Mossad or any other intelligence group. So Hezbollah is part of the problem. And at the same time, you have this big imbalance of power. You cannot say that the state suddenly can defend itself really because it's insolvent. So it's a difficult proposition.
And Jad, other than a resistance power, I think also what Osama was asking about was, at one point, for years, Hezbollah had a deterrent power too. In other words, the Israelis wouldn't bomb Lebanon because they knew there would be a response that they were unable to absorb. That calculation clearly seems to be broken. So at this point, if we look open-endedly, what is there on the horizon at all to stop the Israelis doing what they're doing day in, day out, flying over Beirut with drones or airplanes or bombing or killing or shooting or sniping or, as we heard the other day, spreading, spraying.
It's all of Lebanon. It's all.
I know, yeah. But including Beirut, but spraying, gases or irritant gases or defoliating gases onto agricultural fields in the south of the country. I mean, all the stuff that they do. I mean, they are an endlessly sort of malign actor. So what is there anywhere on the horizon to stop them doing what they're doing? And of course, the answer could be there's nothing on the horizon to stop them. I'm just wondering what you think.
Some of the political parties in Lebanon give different answers. So the first answer is let's make peace with Israel, and then we can just stop this aggression by being their puppets, because this is not really a peace agreement, it's really a surrender. So if you surrender, why should they beat you down? This is the first answer that we have. Some of the proponents of these answers are of the factions that Osama spoke about, those who proclaim the importance of sovereignty. So this is the first answer. The second answer is that Hezbollah is giving this answer. We can go back to the modus vivendi that we had before the 2000, when we had small groups that would make small attacks, and it would be a prolonged fight. Yes, we are the weaker part in it, but we don't have any other path. It is also really hard to re-engender this possibility, having been crushed economically as a country, as a society, and after the impact of the war on Hezbollah's fighters, first of all, and all of the Lebanese, but also with the fall of the Assad regime, through which many of the armaments of Hezbollah was smuggled into Lebanon. So it also has some problems. The third option, the government proclaims that we can do something with diplomacy, and I don't know what diplomacy means if you have to succumb to every American pressure. I believe something in diplomacy and something in, one would try to rebalance, try to fill the void that is left by your powerlessness in Lebanon by getting into alliances in the region. But I don't have all of the interest of all of the political players in the region. So now Israel and Turkey are in a political fight over the whole region. One can say I can align myself maybe more to the Turks in order to balance with the Israelis, but at the detriment of returning Lebanon into an area of a proxy war, because it's a small country that cannot really threaten either the Turks or the Israelis. So it's a very hard question to ask when you have a failed state asked to do so much.
This makes sense. Jad, as we begin to wrap, there's a couple of questions that I think are important to ask. First of all, do you think, I mean, we talked about America, and we've I think someone mentioned that, or Sari, that there's this massive US embassy, which is the most, I believe, the most expensive embassy in the world, and the second largest embassy after the US embassy in Iraq. And that, tells you a lot about the geopolitics here. What is American interest in Lebanon? And is it exactly Israeli interest, or is there some small separation between what the American interest is here and what Israeli interest is here, as far as you can see?
I believe there is a small space between these two entities. It manifests itself basically in Syria. The Israelis really didn't want any leash on their necks to stop what they are doing in southern Syria. The US, on the other hand, wants stability in Syria, because I believe the differences are that the US, what it really basically wants from the region after all of the shift in the balance of power that happened during the 2 years that passed, at least I thought, that's what I thought the US wanted, is to bring stability now, to just benefit from the shift in the balance of power and isolate Iran after it was from Tehran until the Mediterranean Sea. It can have an access from Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. Now it's broken off. It can have a small part in Iraq, yes, but that's it. And we can isolate Iran. The Israelis want to really have a hegemony over the whole region directly. Threatening Syria, threatening Lebanon, threatening Qatar, threatening everybody. So there is this difference. I thought what's making me re-question myself is that I'm not seeing really what's the American project in Iran. What's the American interest? Iran is weaker than any time before, and it cannot really threaten U.S. interest in the region. It can threaten Israel to a certain extent. So I cannot see what's really the American interest. One can say, yes, it's the fight with China, and because Iran is selling oil to China. I don't believe that Iran's size, comparing to the Chinese economy, is big enough to really threaten the whole Middle East, to do a war. I believe this is a war, if it happens, let's see, it would only serve Israel's interest, because really then it would be between the Israelis and the Turks sharing this whole Middle East, with the Israeli upper hand, knowing that the US embassy is really pushing for the Israelis more than the Turks, especially after the Trump administration, because now Trump and Erdogan are doing fine, but no one knows after that what happened. But on the Israeli side, I guess the relations between the US and Israel would outlast Trump.
Yeah, it seems to me, Jad, I mean, you just said it. Well, I'm not sure that U.S.-Israeli relationships are going to outlast Trump. I think there may well be a change coming in that relationship. There's already hints of it. From below, from both sides of the political spectrum in the U.S., there's growing resistance to...
Yeah, but Kamala Harris wants to run again.
Yeah, no, yes, of course, the Democratic Party establishment will be the last,
But she's learned a lesson, by the way. Publicly, she seems to have learned a lesson a little bit.
I have no faith in that party structure, but I mean, really, but more, more presently, the U.S. by all accounts seems to have kind of subcontracted its foreign policy, at least in the Middle East, to the Israelis. If you look at who's making, I mean, literally, Trump has delegated Kushner and what's his name, the other guy, Witkoff, to make decisions about whether to go to war against Iran or whether to bomb Iran. And Kushner and Witkoff are not. These are not diplomats. They don't represent the United States government. They've never been confirmed by the U.S. Senate. They don't have any formal role. They're just Trump's. One is Trump's son-in-law. The other one is Trump's sidekick from real estate ventures in New York. These are people who are, and who are both. I think their loyalties are also very clear, right? It's not, they're both expressly. They've repeatedly confirmed their support for Israel and so forth. So it's clear in that sense who's calling the shots, which is
But it aligns with what the State Department had, the strategic policy paper at the end of last year, I guess. What it says in terms of foreign policy and is that the U.S., as long as it's under the hegemony of the U.S. interest, it can allow for regional political players to take some of the costs and bear some of the costs of really being regional players. And in our region, it would be Israel and to a certain extent Turkey. And that explains that, yes, we as the US can accept some sort of a role of Russia on a regional level. One can understand what the US is doing in terms of letting some proxy players have more leeway in terms of regional politics, their region. But what I cannot understand is that getting all of your military and you bearing the cost of the war for this regional player. It should be the other way around. Yes, the US can be a benefit theoretically if Israel get rid of the Iranian regime without having foot on the ground.
So Jad, on this point, as we wrap, I just got a question because we often debate this on the show. And Sadi has been very adamant and very explicit about always saying that Israel basically is the dominant partner, he says, with the U.S. as opposed to the other way around. Do you read it from Lebanon or wherever you are? You may be in Qatar now, but do you?
I'm in Lebanon.
You're in Lebanon, okay. So do you read it as from a Lebanese perspective? Do you see this idea that the U.S. actually is that there is an independent? I mean, how do you see U.S. policy? Because you're saying you're perplexed by the fact that the U.S. seems to be bearing all the costs. As opposed to Israel. I mean, the U.S. is doing everything for Israel, it seems.
Look, in respect to Trump specifically, I don't get away the option that he might be just simply bought off. I will just answer generally. I guess if one sees the U.S. politics and the Israeli politics in the region, the Israelis are dominant in terms of all of the decisions that the U.S. really don't care about. So if it's striking Hamas and having a war in Gaza, I really don't care about that. So the Israelis will take the decision. Now, if you want to mess with the Egyptian regime, which is a big country that might destabilize not only the Middle East in terms of Asia, but also North Africa, there the interest might disalign. And that's why I believe the Israelis wanted from day one to just shift the war and push it on and push the Americans into a war with Iran. It only got more and more not feasible, but it happened really when Trump got into office. Not because Biden was anti-Israel. He is the most pro-Israel president before Trump. But usually they are not really aligned on issues that really are in the priorities of the United States on a macro level. On the micro level, Israel really directs what the Americans agree on or not. But now, I believe that this war on Iran, either it's Miriam Adelson or something like that's influence, or maybe the Epstein files. I don't know. It's really perplexing.
Karim, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah. So I think, as we wrap, Jad, I just wanted to ask to come back to Lebanon, to the region. How do you see, so we've talked about all these issues, both within the Lebanese context, within the larger international, regional and international context. How do you, and I know, none of us have a crystal ball to look forward, but how do you see this Lebanon and the region unfolding? I mean, we can go from one extreme where there's a massive war with Iran and the whole region kind of falls apart and Lebanon gets consumed in the war and all of this, or you can see it with, as you're saying, and I kind of agree that I think at its core, the main American interest is to produce some kind of stability, which it has hegemony over, which it already does, as you've explained very eloquently on the shift in the balance of power. And you have the Israelis whose main interest is to fragment, to divide, to have war, to continue the genocide, to continue ethnic cleansing, to potentially occupy more of Lebanon, to potentially occupy more of Syria, and this kind of thing. And I think there is a gap between these two interests. And you're right that Miriam Adelson and these kinds of people try to plug this gap to make sure that the Israeli interest kind of prevails within this. How do you see this future, in the coming days or months, at least, if not years?
In terms of days, I have no idea. I'm just watching the news every now and then, just to see what's going on. But generally, I believe that, I guess it's only a guess, that the U.S. and more specifically Israel, I guess it's overplayed its hand in terms of the long run, because now let's say in the Israeli best case scenario, we get rid of the Iranian regime. Now let's take the Gulf region as an example. They usually were getting closer and closer to Israel, and getting closer, and some of these countries like the Emirates were part of the Abraham Accords, and the Saudis were on the verge. Now, after what happened, and this whole path took place because they were trying to balance against Iran. They were fearful of Iran. Now, if you take a look of what's happening in Syria, the rapprochement between the Turks and the Saudis, which is really new, is basically pushed by the need to balance against Israel. Because now the question is, who is going to stop Israel? Especially after they bombed Qatar, which was unimaginable a few months before. So there will be a shift, and this shift will be in a new rivalry. Okay, it wouldn't maybe take the rhetoric that the Iranians carry, that they want to erase Israel from the region, but it wouldn't be less fierce, because the Turks and the Gulf region, and now you can see the high tension and high friction between the Saudis and the Emiratis, and some of this tension relates to this relationship between the Emiratis and the Israelis, and this rivalry also playing its hand in Somaliland and also in Yemen, which which cover the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb. So it's a strategic region for Saudis. So it would be a fierce regional rivalry, I guess, from now on. And I don't believe that the Abraham Accords can easily get Saudis in, but I don't guarantee anything. No one knows, especially with the if the shift is so big, then this whole region might be destabilized. And what I believe to be the U.S. interest to stabilize the region in order to concentrate on the containment of China and other bigger stuff, I believe the region would be a land place for big rivalries if the destabilization goes forward more.
Okay, well, I think on that note of uncertainty that we're all living in, and especially you and me, Jad, here, as we flip onto our social media and just like day to day trying to figure out if there's a war and how do we individually but collectively also play out in this. I think we'll leave it at that, and I just wanted to thank you again for this really interesting discussion about Lebanon and the region. And I can't say I'm filled with hope, to be honest, but at least we're all more aware. And exactly. So thanks a lot, Jad. Shukran.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, we just I thought that was an incredibly interesting, but also complex and difficult discussion as usual when it comes to Lebanon. It's always very complex. What did you guys think? I have my own take, but what did you guys think?
Well, it reminds me of teaching. When you know a subject really well, it's much more difficult to teach than when you don't know a subject as well. And I think that's exactly what happened here. Lebanon is a very complicated place, and Jad was, it was really incredibly illuminating to listen to somebody who, I mean, Karim, in a sense, like you, because you and Jad are both there, and you're both, intellectuals, and he's an investigative journalist, and he did a lot of work on especially about the financial collapse, which is still, to me, is still amazing. The idea that there's a financial collapse in the country and the government's policy is basically nothing, zero. We'll let the people suck it up and deal with it. Which, by the way, is what the central bank governor, the disgraced central bank governor, actually said at the time. Remember, he said, they'll get used to it. Nothing is going to happen. Don't worry, the people will get used to it. And so I think that was, really interesting. And then Seti, your observations, your comments, or your commentary about the relationship between Lebanon and the U.S., was that confirmed by this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, look, obviously I'm coming at it right now from a U.S., like looking at the U.S. I mean, if you look at what's going on inside the U.S. right now, one day there are tariffs, one day there aren't. One day it's 10%, one day, I changed my mind, now I'm 15%. Now I'm going to give these guys, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to give this guy, it reminds me very much of the kind of highly personalized set of politics in Lebanon, where it's coteries of oligarchs cutting deals with each other, basically. But Jad raised a really important question. Why do people vote for it? And of course, the question goes in Lebanon too. I mean, why do people vote for the same? I mean, there have been people like him ran. There have been good people running for parliament in previous elections. It's the same old. It's the usual parties that always win, just as in the U.S. It's the with one or two exceptions. Mamdani is a very rare exception. Hopefully there'll be more like that. But in general, people, it's very difficult to understand why anybody in their right minds would vote for somebody like Trump, unless it suits their interest, which is about 6 people in the entire country. So why would anybody else vote?
But Karim, on this point, we know why people vote for traditional sort of feudal or semi-feudal or conventional parties, because they promise. It's Tammany Hall. They promise jobs. They promise to get to the roads paved, and they do all these things. And in return, you have to give up any form of real democracy in that sense. So we know why they do it. The question here is, Karim, when he said that at the end that he believes that Israeli actions in Lebanon and in the region have overextended themselves. What did you make of that?
No, I think that's correct. But just as one point, I mean the way, and we didn't get to this in too much depth, but it was implied with what Jad was saying, which is the state here kind of has contained, at least for the past 20 years, this balance between, let's say, pro-resistance access in Lebanon that defines and understands the Lebanese state and Lebanese sovereignty as being there to protect itself from the Israelis, and that the Israelis are the existential threat to the Lebanese state, to Lebanese sovereignty, and literally to territory through occupation and all of this. The other side, which was much weaker and now has become much strengthened after this Israeli war, says no, the state is defined as in its negative terms for Hezbollah. In other words, Hezbollah is the destabilizer. The Israelis attack and occupy Lebanon because of Hezbollah, and so the way to regain Lebanese sovereignty in the state is by disarming Hezbollah, neutering it basically. Okay, maybe keeping it in terms of local political thing, but within the sectarian setup, but removing it as an actual military and dominant political party among the Shia in Lebanon. And that's how you define the state and sovereignty. And so you have these things that simply negate each other. They're absolutely in clash with each other, and have been so for 20 years. After the 2006 war, and in that period, Hezbollah, kind of the resistance kind of narrative emerged to be able to set the overall Lebanese state and Lebanese army kind of narrative. Now we have the reverse. Neither one of them has been able to impose themselves fully in terms of the Lebanese politics. And we're seeing this out. That's why, despite the fact that Hezbollah lost militarily this war, that's why I asked several times about the parliamentary elections that are coming up, because it seems to be, and the municipality elections kind of recently confirmed this, that it's very likely that Hezbollah, despite all this, is likely to win all of the Shia seats again, as it did before, between Hezbollah and Amal. Sort of, two main parties. They're likely to dominate it all. If maybe one seat might go, but sort of pretty much dominate the seats. And this, very importantly, would re-legitimize Hezbollah and the resistance even in this Lebanese body politic, and pull out the rug of the constant narrative that Hezbollah lost, is defeated, and therefore has to pay the consequences of such defeat politically and militarily through disarming. So this is a big thing. And this is one of the reasons that elections are likely to be postponed because of that. At least that's one of the factors that's pushing it. For what you're saying, yeah, I do think that the Israelis, in a sense, they are overextending. And it's a bit like they did in Palestine and other areas where they keep on pushing and overextending. They're already beginning to talk about Turkey at the regional level. It's as though Iran is already done. And they're already beginning to curse and say, Turkey with Qatar are the main, threats. So now you're engaging with the Sunni world after supposedly dealing with the Shia world. And now they're already putting up this enemy to come after Iran, assuming Iran exits the stage in one form or the other, in their imagination. So it's a never-ending, regional hegemony that they want to create a unipolar kind of region, and
because
I think in the end it'll fail.
Karim, because of the fact that the Israelis don't actually pay a price, in the sense that it's the U.S., it's U.S. taxpayers. It's the United States that's doing all the work for Israel.
Yeah, the Israelis get the benefits.
That's what's so extraordinary about this state that was created in the Middle East at the expense of the Palestinians, as we all know. The idea that this state, is doing whatever it can do, and it has the U.S. at its beck and call. I mean, it is extraordinary. I think it reminds me of, for example, how can Iran, in a sense, it's a question for maybe for Sadi and you, since you guys are more militarily you're much more sort of nuanced than I am when it comes to these things, and you know more about military stuff than I do in terms of like strategy and so on. How can Iran could never have prepared, like in terms of gaming out these scenarios. How could the Iran have prepared for fighting the U.S. in total? Like, in other words, their scenario would have been fighting Israel, right? That would have been what they would have been, or thinking about a regional sort of struggle, not confronting the U.S. You don't think so?
I don't think so.
You think they were prepared for this? They've
long understood, and by the way, if you recall,
maybe you're right. As I said,
listen to Hassan Nasrallah's speeches, they would always say that America is the main force, that Israel acts.
Yeah, I understand, but like the main force as
so therefore they prepare for that.
You think they're preparing for a full-on assault?
Like this? In terms of defensive, it's not full-on assault on America, obviously. It's the
Karim,
the idea is regional allies. It's the regional allies.
Yeah, but that reading, but there's an incorrect reading there on their part, which is to say, you just said it, that in their view, Israel is America's stick, and what we're saying, what I'm saying is exactly the other way around. America is Israel's stick, rather, and that's why the Israelis can do what they did in Gaza. Not just I don't mean more, forget morally and ethically. I mean, of course, that too. But the fact that they can spend billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars on bombs and bombing and killing and blowing up because somebody else is paying for it. They're totally scot-free in terms of, at least in terms of the immediate cost.
And somebody else is going to pay for whatever is left of Gaza. Somebody else is going to pay. They don't pay anything. It's incredible.
Yeah, but you're talking about Iran, not the US here. In terms of what the Iranis and Hezbollah would say, but the result is the same. In other words, the preparation is they understand that the Israelis can't attack without the Americans. They understand that America has overwhelming force and overwhelming power, and eventually, if it's a war of attrition,
but the Iranians have been going out of their way not to. I mean, my sense. Correct me if I'm wrong, Karim. They've gone out of their way not to provoke the U.S.
Yeah, of course. As did Hezbollah.
Therefore,
and they also pose no threat whatsoever to the U.S. And in fact, to go back to the recurring theme of this conversation, if you think about what American interests are, what they've always been in the Middle East. Stability and getting oil. Otherwise, they don't need messing things up. Is not in an American interest. It does not serve the purposes of the United States.
But Sarah, that's what I keep saying. In other words, there is a distinct American interest to an Israeli interest, and those lobby guys and whatever, those people always are. It's a constant process of trying to make that gap zero. They keep pushing that gap to zero.
Yeah. But
by removing,
But right now they are, especially in the case of Trump, who's void. There's a political, intellectual, and moral void there.
But he said it openly. He said that didn't he say openly when wasn't there like a recording of him very open about Miriam Edelson is
Yeah, he said it. No, of course.
I mean,
But
even
even other than that, there's a non-entity there, intellectually speaking. So they can take advantage of a void at the heart of American politics.
Biden was a big intellectual presence.
No, also a void. Oh no, also a void. Although Biden was actually, I don't see. The thing is, the difference is Trump has no commitments. Biden was a committed Zionist from the beginning to this. There is like Biden actually had a commitment.
Here's the question I have. I'm going to go back to Lebanon, if you don't mind, Sadi and Karim, just to the whole question of those people, the so-called sovereignty group. I mean, intellectually, just honestly, just like
they're delusional.
Vacuous.
They're
it's
delusional.
It's just the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my life. These are people who
it's not absurd.
utterly and totally depend.
If we want to be nuanced,
No, but they keep talking about sovereignty, but they're always begging the United States to and they're running.
No, but also other than sovereignty, it's also they keep thinking Israel attacks Lebanon because of Hezbollah. Okay, yeah, Hezbollah was a product of Israel attacking Lebanon, not the other way around.
But then they blame the PLO, and then they blame everything. You know, the narrative is set in their minds. They have a very clear narrative.
If we want to be nuanced, I think we do need to for the sake of putting everything on the table, I think it's important to say there is nuance within that kind of grouping. The full-on ideologues and etc. That's one thing. You do have a chunk of people that will say that it's not ideological, but pragmatically. They'll say, look around you. Syria is gone. Syria is very much in the American column and probably in the Israeli column. They're trying to, there's a thing, but basically in the American column now.
Yeah.
Iraq is this kind of hodgepodge of things and a bit schizophrenic like Lebanon. You have all these pressures. As Jad was saying, the balance of power has shifted. And their point is, as the pragmatist, and Hezbollah has been defeated militarily, etc., in their minds. So what is the alternative? You can sit there and say, no, we want to resist, but you're going to get pummeled.
I'm talking about, but that's pragmatism.
But how do you counter that? Yeah, but how do you counter that?
Hang on. But that's pragmatism. That's pragmatism that depends and reflects the balance of power. It's not the people who've been like whining about sovereignty endlessly, and yet have no issues or problems being utterly dependent on other powers, and not presenting any kind of agency of their own. It's not like that's the issue I have. It's not pragmatism. That's not the issue for me. It's not the question of pragmatism. That's something you can analyze and you can say, okay.
But if you take it from a pragmatic point of view, how do you answer that question? That's the kind of the nuance. If you want to think about it, you're in a position where you have opposing projects.
Yeah, no, sure.
These are opposing projects, both politically and militarily.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how do you, if you want to look and say, but the presence in their argument, the presence is something that's going to always attract Israeli responsive Israeli text. The other side, of course, is saying, well, the Israelis don't need any excuse. They don't need Hezbollah or anyone else to be there. They're now openly, we even said this, the supposed opposition leader, Lapid, coming and saying, basically hinting, yes, greater Israel, yes. We have to be careful because we don't know security-wise whether we can do it, but yes, I want to do it. We saw...
in other words, validating what Mike Huckabee said, yeah.
Mike Huckabee and what the Likud Party project is.
But that's the point. Those so-called sovereigntists who go on and on and on endlessly, and my point is that they seem to have no understanding of history. History didn't begin in 1982, and history didn't begin in 2006. Nor did it begin in 2011. So, I mean, the idea of saying, okay, but what is it you're dealing with? And how do you analyze that? And what kind of plan do you have? I mean, I think that's really the question.
And for our readers and for our audience, the members who don't know, the Israelis, the diaries of the former Israeli Prime Minister, Moshe Sharett, were released, Foreign Minister, I'm sorry. And part of what they revealed is that there was a plan going back to the 1950s by the part of the Israelis to invade Lebanon, occupy it south of the Litani River, and install a pliant, military guy and Christian guy as the kind of governor of the province of Lebanon, in effect. And that's my point. That's why the Israelis' desires for Lebanon go way, way, way before the PLO, before the Palestinians, before the Palestinian presence in Lebanon, long before Hezbollah, of course. So there's a kind of chicken and egg here that they don't really understand the sequence. So it's
also, Sadi, that just as a reference for people out there want to check it out, this is the May 1983 agreement that the Lebanese parliament had to sign were kind of basically forced to sign with the Israelis after the 1982 invasion. And there was an agreement that basically ceded South Lebanon to the Israelis and demilitarized. But that was abrogated, and then you ended up with this February 1984, kind of the militias that came into Beirut and kicked out the army. So there was it ushered in a new phase of the civil war, that kind of second phase of the civil war, because at least that was one of the reasons, because you had a situation where the country simply couldn't absorb such a treaty and a kind of configuration. And so the concern today is, for me anyway, is a similar kind of thing, where you have those that are pushing for this kind of surrender agreement, even if you take them on good faith, that's just in a pragmatic way, and what can we do, and you need to recognize balance of power, forget the ideologues. You're still in a situation where the country, because of the sectarian makeup, because of the political makeup, this will very likely lead you to the breakup of the army and more kind of civil war or some version of civil strife that won't end, because in the end, that's what the Israelis always want in Lebanon. That's what they're going to get in Syria, and that's what they're going to keep pushing. And I think we're still at the beginning of this. So unless somebody's able to stop the Israelis,
but Karim, isn't this?
I'm not sure how this ends.
I need to go. Well, no, how it ends is, if you look at the neocon plan, isn't this didn't it begin? Wasn't there the whole neocon thing about you start with Iraq, then you go on to Syria, then you go on to Iran? Isn't this where we are now? We're actually got now to Iran.
Yeah. So that was stopped or suspended in 2008.
What was that? What was that? Can you remind us?
That was the plan that I can't remember the
Richard Pearl, wasn't it?
The clean break plan. The clean break plan.
Authored by Netanyahu.
No, I don't think it was Netanyahu.
Yeah, of course it was. It was pushed by Netanyahu, and then the other guys kind of wrote it down. But effectively, it's a Netanyahu plan, and the idea was to go through these countries, Iraq first, and then you go to Lebanon, Syria, basically Hezbollah, Hamas, and then eventually and Sudan, and I don't know where, a few other countries, and then the ultimate prize, of course, is Iran, and that disappeared because they kind of got defeated. I think especially in 2006 war in Lebanon, and it kind of came to an end there. And now we're kind of back at this, where they want to get to Iran and finish that project. Except now they're adding to the clean break. I think they're adding now Turkey, Qatar and Turkey to this long list, and it doesn't end. This list never ends.
Okay.
So I think we should wrap on this. It's so complicated, and just talking about Lebanon opens up, because Lebanon is never just little Lebanon. It's always, as the Lebanese love to say, it's always the kind of regional, international playground. And where all these different politics are going to get reflected. So stay tuned on this. Yeah, take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good to see you guys.